I'd like to call the Finance, Facilities, and Operations Committee to order, please. And please know that Mrs. Deeroff is on the phone with us tonight. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the August 13th committee minutes from the Finance, Facilities, and Operations Committee. Do I have a motion?
Elsier moves.
Mr. Elsier, and a second. Mr. Foos. I'm blanking on names again tonight. Any comments or questions? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Is there anyone signed up for public comment?
No.
No? Okay, thank you. So now we get to the presentation and discussion portion of the meeting, and the first item is the capital project list.
Madam Chair, Mr. Drescher is here to update you on it. This is going to be short. You all have copies, but it's also posted for the public. He'll just give a general overview, but he thought it was important since he's new and we've had so much transition to at least share this with you on the record, to kind of what he's found so far and what things are.
Okay, so a couple of notes before I even get started. If it's not on this list and you've seen it on a prior list, it's done or it's completed. There are a couple items on here that where you see it says investigation or needs investigation. It's something that was done by Paul or Bill, my predecessors, and I feel like I need to look at it myself to better understand it and understand how they came up with the numbers. Two items in particular. One would be Boyertown Elementary classroom univents and the sewer plant upgrades at Earl Elementary. Those two items in particular, I got to dig a little bit deeper into that to see exactly how they came up with those numbers. I've done similar projects to these in the recent past 3 years, and those numbers don't jive with me. So until I dig into it deeper, I just want to, and another reason why I want to say this is because looking at the long projections, some of those numbers more than likely are going to change, just based on economy, availability of contractors. They're not like they were 5 years ago. They're hard to come by. They're all busy. So, when that happens, prices go up. It's pretty, in the description on the far right column, it's pretty easy to understand. I won't go through each and every one, but if there's any questions regarding any of them, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you for the summary. It sounds like you've got the list kind of started from here forward and you're cleaning it up and refining it. Thank you. Mr. Eltier?
Yes, not a question, but just a comment. I want to thank you for diving right into this. This is something that we as a board gave direction to a past administration to come up with several years ago to get a handle on the needs in capital projects throughout the district. And this is near and dear, should be near and dear, obviously, to what you do, of course. But it helps us as far as planning out, as far as allocating funds to complete the projects. And I'm sure if you haven't been brought up to speed, we did approve a number of projects, going into this summer. So that was 4 months ago, and that. So thank you for diving right into this as you came on board. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I had a follow-up to Mr. Elsier's question. So the board was given a list of the work that was completed over the summer. My question was, is that what was planned? Was planned the same as what was completed, or was there anything that was different?
I couldn't really tell you, to be honest with you. I spent 3 days with Paul, and it was a basic nightmare of papers everywhere. He drilled things into me for about 10, 12 hours a day. And so I'm just getting to the point now where I'm about halfway through his paperwork. And I'm taking it one step at a time, working side by side with Lee. And Lee has been telling me what's important, what's not important, what can be put on the back burner, so to speak. We're cleaning things up from 2 years ago, still to this day. So my goal is to get all the past things that are still out there, outstanding, get them closed up, get them finished, off the plate, so we can concentrate on what's in front of us right now and then work on future things.
Okay, appreciate
Okay.
your honesty.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on tonight's agenda is the donation for the replacement of the pole vault landing system.
Mr. Palladino is here to share with you. There was a question that was posed to me and to make all the board members, I think I responded to all of you about the Boyertown Stadium Committee and whether or not, and one other board member asked, had they bought something else. It wasn't a pole vault. There was another item that you do remember this group from that they paid for. Mr. Palladino can fill you in on that. But some wanted to get an understanding of just what the Boyertown Stadium Committee is also.
Okay. Good evening. Boyertown Stadium Committee is a group of investors that when the Memorial Stadium was initially done back in 1985, 1986, they were in charge of the fundraising efforts. The two main fundraisers right now, or chairman of that committee, are Mr. Bob Reinhardt and Mr. Ralph Borneman. They control the advertising right now that is in Memorial Stadium. So all the advertising signs that you see up, this committee takes care of those signs. They collect the money for those signs, and then they hold that money until a point where we need it for something for a donation. And that's what, right now we are asking for them to replace the pole vault landing system, which right now it's a safety hazard. We would not be able to hold a meet and use this pit. Just by looking at it, we couldn't find a date or any old purchase orders. It's probably 20, 22 years old. They usually last about 10 years. So we got our life expectancy out of it. Probably about 5 years ago, they did replace the high jump landing pit. So they replaced that for us. The past few years, they've put some aluminum benches, things like that in there for our players to sit on. The gator that you see our athletic trainers driving around on, they donated that also. So I approached the board, Mr. Reinhardt. They extended they will pay the full amount for the pole vault landing system. Lowest bid for the quality pit we would like is $13,195, and they have agreed to donate that full amount.
That's very much appreciated. Any comments from the board? Yes, Mr. Elsier.
No, I appreciate the work on that. This group is near and dear to the stadium, the multi-use stadium, and appreciate it coming to the board with this as opposed to just more taxpayer dollars. So thank you.
They're a great group to deal with. Whenever we need something, they're always there to help us out with it.
Mr. Foos.
When I hear pole vault, I think of one name. I think of a former Boyertown graduate, Adam Bingaman, who I graduated with. We both started pole vaulting together. I fell on my head too many times. He kept doing it, and ended up going to Virginia Tech to compete. And he did well in the ACC. I think he went to NCAA's. Had a really good pole vaulting career that started at Boyertown. So it's great that we're continuing that, and that they'll have new landing area.
Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much.
We just want to recommend that this goes
Sorry.
forward.
You need
for-
something
yeah.
from us here. So we want, you want to put this on the next board meeting
Yes.
agenda. Is there anyone opposed to doing that? Okay, you have the go-ahead to do that.
Can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
To your knowledge, is the so-called stadium committee an actual nonprofit, or is it just some individuals that continue to be maintained? Is it an actual organization?
To my knowledge, you're an actual organization and nonprofit.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Optimist basketball season ticket pass proposal.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
just want to put the context. This is something that probably normally wouldn't been come here to my knowledge. If it should be, then it'd be news to us. But at minimum, because it's something new that is trying to produce additional revenue and a new idea, we thought it was best that you all heard about it and share any thoughts, so it didn't create any other angst later. So that's the context that this is being brought forward to the board.
So on this one, it's just FYI, you don't need any action from us.
Yes, because we
Okay.
couldn't find anything that said you needed to act upon it, but it's a change in how we do something new in the community.
Okay.
And Mr. Palladino thought, based from past, with something else that maybe we should bring it to your attention.
Great, go ahead.
I met with members of the Boyertown Optimist basketball program and the Boyertown YMCA basketball program. And what our main goal is, we're trying to increase attendance at our girls and boys varsity games with kids who are involved in our basketball program all the way down to kindergarten. Right now, estimated ticket sales for a normal game, boys or girls, is anywhere between 150 and 200. So we figure maybe 10% of those people are the younger kids. We want to try to do what we call season pass. That will be only sold to those student athletes who are participating in this program. So for $30, their family would receive a season pass where they could come to unlimited basketball games for that season. Get the kids involved in the program. We do things where, like at halftime, we play what we call biddy games, which our high school kids will referee for them. We just want to create a little bit more excitement in the program and try to get our numbers up. I'll say when this works, because I'm dead set on making it work, we would like to see if we can move this to other programs across the board where we have to charge an attendance fee, whether it be wrestling, football, field hockey, things like that, where we can get our attendance, get a little more of our community involved in the actual program. We want to try to make it so it's not just mom and dad showing up at the games. We want the community to take part in this and to show up and be involved in it. And we feel that, especially if you have a young child playing, this is a great way to get them involved, bring them to the high school games, let them watch these kids play. Our players are involved with them. They see the faces. It just creates a better overall community aspect. So, like I said, we would estimate that 10% at each game are Optimist and YMCA players. So 10 home games a year, if we have 10 boys games, we anticipate $90 of revenue per game, and $900 for a year would be from those members. So if we sell, there's over 600 families part of these organizations. So if we sell to 5% of those families, we'll break even. We'll just status quo. If 10% raise, we doubled our revenue intake, and if we sell 20%, then we would quadruple it. Some families will take total advantage, where they might come to every game. Other ones might bypass and only show up to one or two. So we're hoping they would buy the pass and come out as many times as needed, because then they'll be using our concession stands, which our booster clubs run, and all that money goes back to our student athletes also. So we feel it could be a win-win for everybody, for the school, for the community, and for our youth organizations.
So, Madam Chair, what I struggled with when we were going to pull it, you have an admission to school events, the Gold Pass, but when I did a search on our policies, I'm not sure I found anything, so I don't know how you went about establishing, even when you did the Gold Pass. But so from a historical perspective, did the board do anything with that? Because everything looks like an AR. So it's just an awareness thing that I know of, and just want to make sure that there's nothing we're missing.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't.
Mrs. Denon?
Yeah, I don't think the board, as far as I know, since I've been on, we've done anything. And since, you know, I guess my oldest is gonna be 30, so how many years we were involved in sports here, I don't remember ever having anything like this, but I know that, the parents of the kids who participate in Biddy, in the Y, and even in middle school basketball, going to high school basketball, because that's the sport I was most familiar with. They would talk about how, is there any way that since my son is playing, can we have, you know, not have to pay admissions to the game? And I believe all those discussions were at an administrative level. None of us ever said, well, let's go to the board and see if the board can decide. I think it was an administrative. But regardless, I just think it's a really great proposal. I do know that Boyertown, I think, is it still $6? So it was higher than some of the other schools, which were $5.
6 and 3. Yep.
So I think that, you know, if you have three kids and the mom and dad and they want to come to a basketball game, you know, it's like $21, and it's cost prohibitive for some families to go to those games. So I could see that all of those families buying that's one game. It's like, you know, it's like when you join the zoo, right? It's
Yep.
the same kind of
Yep.
thing. So, and I think it serves a dual purpose. I mean, I think you're focusing on getting participation at our sports level and having kids be excited about playing sports, but I also do think it's nice for the community and for those parents who want to take their kids to games and, you know, have more than one child. I mean, I know at one point we had 4, so it was $12 plus 12. It was $24 to go see a high school basketball game. So I think it's a great idea, and you know, I'm glad you brought the idea to us. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I don't think it's something that the board has to.
I don't recall
Approve.
anything like that either. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Mr. Boyer?
I think that anything we can do to inspire kids and families to participate in athletics is great. So I think it's a great idea.
Mr. Alcier?
Ditto. Thank you. Yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Nyman?
Instead of just making it for the Optimist basketball, can't we just make it as something that any Optimist group that wants a pass to this could get it? I mean, because Optimists they have the football, you know, they have baseball, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, couldn't we just say anybody involved in the Optimist can get this pass?
The reason we wanted to try it with this was so Optimist basketball came to me with the concern to try to get their kids involved up here. So we worked together a little bit back and forth. This is what we came up with. If this is successful, we would like then to move it to the Optimist football, because they sound like they're one organization, but they're run by totally different entities. Different people run different ones. Basketball is the easiest one to start with because they're a 2-month season and there's a lot of games in those 2 months. Baseball, we only usually have like 2 night games, and they're the only ones we charge admission for. The next one would probably be wrestling. We usually have 3 or 4 home wrestling matches. Football, with the stadium how it was too late pretty much for this year to get it started. We do have Optimist nights during football season where we give them free admittance to come in. But we figured we would start just with basketball, get a grasp of it, and if this model worked, then we could branch out to those other sports, or even to maybe even some of our middle school families, if they're on a middle school team, try to make like a family pass for people who are already in the district, or those parents who they might be going to 4 games a week. If they have a daughter who plays basketball and a son who plays basketball, they're going to 4 or 5 games a week. I mean, it can be a pretty penny at times. So we figured we would just start with this, make sure it worked, because Optimist basketball can almost put this in their registration fee. So they would say, if you want this when they register, they could pay for it then, and then the Optimist pays us for how many passes they sold. Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Foos?
I like the idea, and as you described, I have the similar understanding about Optimist, having kind of each sport has its own board, and then there's an overall board, and then obviously sports like wrestling has BAWA and other committees. I think it's an interesting idea, and I like that it's trying to draw more people at a better price point. And I think it's a great idea to do it as a pilot, because to just kind of see if it ends up working out as you kind of theoretically propose. I don't know if I brought it up before, but it was mentioned to me a while back about some of the different sports and the admissions fees, and for some families it can be difficult to be able to attend, and so I think it's good that we're doing something that might be able to make that better. I mean, I would love to see a pilot of if some sport were willing to try just free admittance and accept donations at the entrance, and because you're trying to drive people there, and they're probably going to buy something to eat at the concession stand anyway. But I think this is a good idea, and I'm hopeful to see how the results are.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the PFM presentation by Mr. Remig on bond refinancing.
Madam President, since Ms. Clouser's over there trying to manage the equipment, our Brad is here, and we have an opportunity for you all to consider to possibly save some money. The short and sweet, right?
Short and sweet, you got it. This is a pretty straightforward presentation. There's not a lot of stuff to it. It's really kind of a basic refinancing. You have a couple bonds that are callable. You can lower the interest rate and save some money on some of your interest payments. And if you, I think on board docs is my presentation. On the very first page, right behind the cover, is the interest rate chart that you've almost always see from me. There's a lot there, but we'll go to the bottom if you don't mind. If you look at that chart, the reason we're here, really since the winter when we did the financing for the project, you can see that line has continued to go down. A lot of the trade war things you're hearing about, some discussion about the Federal Reserve dropping interest rates and maybe dropping them even further, has caused interest rates to continue to fall. So that's really kind of when I see a chart like this, it's my job to pick up the phone and call Becky and now Carol and figure out if there's any opportunities for Boyertown. So page number 2 is the page that lists all your indebtedness. Okay, I've highlighted in yellow for those of you that have it in color, the 2012 and 2013 bonds. Okay, those bonds are relatively short. They really only have about 5 or 6 more years on them. Okay, if you look towards the bottom of that table, you'll notice that I have almost always list what I call the call date. That's the date at which the bonds can be prepaid or refinanced without penalty. And you'll notice that for the 2012 and 2013, we've passed those dates, so they're now eligible to be done. The ones further to the right, we haven't quite gotten to those dates yet, so we can't refinance them on a tax-free basis. Okay, so those are the 2 that were identified. They were not what I call in the money when we were talking about this winter. It's just that line that the rates have continued to fall, as we got over the summer and things of the like. So what we try to do for you is on page 3, we listed the current payments in more detail for the 2012 bond. So it has my, gives me my principal and my interest. And you'll notice, I want to point out a couple things. First is that final payment, if you look on the left, is October 1st of 2025, which is, again, about 6 years from now. I'm just going to keep that in mind for the 2012. Column 3 are the different fixed rates for each part of the bond. If you remember the way that the bonds work is when you sell a different part of it, it goes to a different investor and they get individual fixed rates. And then we kind of put it together like a puzzle. So quite often when someone looks at this, they're going to say, Brad, how come our rate increases as we go out in the future? That's not, in fact, the case. What happened when the bonds were sold, like I said, in 2012, is these investors got different fixed rates and we pieced them together. Okay, so that's what we're starting with in column 3, is those rates that range from 2 to 2.625. And again, as I mentioned, it gets paid off in 2025, and you can see there's about $5,265,000 left of it. That's the very bottom of the sum of column 2. Okay. The next one is your 2013 bond very similar. It pays off in October of 2025. In column 3, those fixed rates, they're a little bit higher. They range from 2 to 3%. And there's about $3,290,000 on those, okay? So if we were to do our math, and actually what we were going to propose to do is consolidate them into one bond. It'll save on some annual administrative costs, okay? Put them into one financing, and then the numbers on page 6, and I know I went through this quickly, kind of compare what a payment on a new bond would look like at today's rates to what the old payments would be if you just kind of stuck with it. So if to do this financing, pay off those 2 bonds, pay the closing costs, because the numbers are all kind of net of all that, we would issue a bond that's about in column 2, it's about $8,545,000. The fixed rates range in column 4 from 1.25 to 1.45. That's where they are nowadays, which are lower than what I mentioned on earlier's. You'll also notice that we still schedule the bond to be paid off October of 2025. So this is kind of a straight, what we refer to plain vanilla, high to low refunding, where we're taking fixed rates from old bonds, paying them off, issuing a new bond, paying closing costs, and if your end result in column 11 is you look like you save about a net of about $146,000. Now, that's not a huge amount of money, but it's a significant enough money that we wanted to bring it to your attention, okay? So we've done some refinancings to save more, but with only 6 years left and where rates are where they are, and since we've kind of passed the call date, it did seem like an opportunity that was worthy bringing to the board to consider, especially since we weren't extending terms or stretching things out. We were just kind of doing it. This is probably the last chance at this one too as well. So I'll pause there and answer any questions that anybody might have. I know you guys are kind of professionals at this nowadays.
Every time I look at your presentation before the meeting, I understand a little bit
Bit
more
more,
about it.
okay.
Any questions from anyone? Ms. Nyman?
Are we going to have to get insurance for this?
I have budgeted for it, okay? We're going to go through the process. I don't know if it'd be first of all, if the board wants us to pursue it, some combination of Becky and Carol will go through the process of the credit rating. If you remember, about a year and a half ago, we had a little bit of a negative outlook put on that. If we can get that removed, we won't need it. If they decide to downgrade us, we may need it. I have budgeted and been conservative that we may have to go for it. But what I normally do is, depending on my rating, I go to the bankers and I get proposals and say, do you want it or don't you want it? Show me the rates with and without it. And do I want to spend my client's money to get a better rate? Does that net do better for my client? So we will probably apply for it. Hopefully we won't need to use it. But I'm preparing for it. We may have to. But again, that's all, that number I just mentioned to you is kind of bakes all that in. I will tell you also one other thing, that those rates that I showed in the illustration in column 4, there's not a lot of cushion in those. Sometimes, as you know with me, I'm a little bit more conservative on my estimates for where the fixed rates are. But there's not a lot of cushion in there, and that I just bring that up especially since in order for this to move forward, it's going to take some time for us to actually lock the interest rate. By the time the board authorizes it, does any parameters resolutions, with the interest rates this low, these credit rating agencies are very backed up in terms of getting through the rating process. It can take 3 to 4 weeks nowadays. And also at this time of the year, as you can imagine, they're very interested in knowing how you closed out at the 18-19 year, and those numbers are still kind of coming together too. So we'll have to work through all that as well.
So is this something that we need to take some action on, something you need some board direction on this evening?
No, because it's going to take us some time, I kind of put on page number 8 what a sample resolution might look like that you've kind of done in the past. I don't know if this rings a bell for you or not, and a sample timeline. First off is you would tell the administration to get to work on this with us, and I'd get all the other parties together, make sure all the paperwork's done and things of the like. You could probably tell us that at your next meeting. I think your board meeting's the 24th. Okay, and then the next meeting, I don't know whether we could do it the 8th or the 22nd. I forget how if you have the ability to vote on either one, but you would approve the parameters resolution, the not to exceed figures, And then we would, go ahead, lock the transaction, and then obviously we would present the end result to the board president or vice president, and he or she would have the ability to sign off on the final contract as long as certain conditions were met, so the not to exceed numbers. And also, in this example, I did put a blank in there. That is, it would be nice to know what the board, obviously you want to get as much savings as you can, and that's my job as your fiduciary, to get as much as I can, but I certainly wouldn't want to, for example, if the market changed and we could get $125,000, for example, I wouldn't want to necessarily walk away with that if the board said, hey, collectively, we would have been happy with $100,000 or whatever the number is. We have set targets here in the past on these, so I just kind of thought this would be a good forum to just open that up to see if anybody had any comments. For a transaction with only 5 years left on it, 146 seems like a lot. You might even be willing to settle for a little bit less. Again, and I want to make sure that everybody knows this, it's my job to make that number as big as possible. But I wouldn't want to walk away from something that you would have otherwise been happy with if we do see a change in interest rates.
Okay. So we do need to have the board agree that it would go on to the September 24th agenda as an authorization to proceed. Correct, Dr. Bedden? Okay. Comments? Mrs. Denon?
Yes, so right now it's about 146,000 net of all that. I'm just curious, when you say the closing costs, I don't know if I maybe missed it. Was there a line item for that?
There was, yeah. I'm
I
sorry, on
didn't- I
page
couldn't
7.
find it.
I apologize.
Okay,
Page 7.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Yep, there's all that.
I missed
What
it,
I
okay.
did with those, just for, again, being fully transparent with the board, is I went back and looked at some of the closing costs you paid on prior transactions. My strategy would be, hey, this isn't a huge saver. The district's been very good to this team. Is there any way we can do this for a little bit less collectively to put some more money in the savings column? But that number is based on a whole number of what we've had to do in the past for bonds.
So so it's the cost of the series, I see that, and then so what is the actual closing? Is it the cost of issuance?
Right. Those are all the
$80,000?
$80,000 is typically what professional cost would be. I also, to Ms. Nyman's point, I assumed that we did go for bond insurance. So if we don't
Okay.
need that, then we get a zero, that
Right.
goes to savings
Right.
or something
Okay.
like that. But that's what I've kind of put as a budget together. So
Okay.
every dollar I can get cut off that is more that goes to your savings number.
Right, okay. I wasn't sure if that was the cost of issuance was
Yeah.
the actual, okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Altier?
Yeah, so once again, I appreciate you looking out for Boyertown, and interest rates have gone down, and you're coming to us with this. So I just want to make sure I understand, and I'll keep it simple. So over the remaining life of the loan, the payments at this point you're estimating would be less by $146,000.
Correct.
Okay. And if the insurance is not needed, and I saw an $80,000 figure, now we're at close to $250,000 less.
Insurance is about 18,000, excuse me.
Oh, 18,
Yeah.
okay, maybe I.
So if I can
put
get
my
the
glasses
80,
on.
but the 80 is the lawyers and the credit rating agencies and all those people.
Okay.
But if the insurance is about 18.
Okay, so still, the 146 could go up. The credit rating, is that done, like, obviously they have a look back over several years, but the purpose of my question is, we had some good news at the end of this fiscal year. In fact, I think we're going to get that next presentation in a minute. Due to the fact, right, wrong, or indifferent, we had some unfilled positions. So we actually ended up with a surplus this year. So, or excess, thank you. Get the wording right, fiscal wording. So we had an excess. Would they look at, like, till right now?
This is great news for me to hear. I mean, we were reviewed 18 months ago. We did not have the 17-18 audit. I think they have seen the 17-18 audit because we post all that stuff on Emma, which is a website that has all the public information. They must have seen it. They're supposed to review you annually. If they have questions or concerns, they're supposed to contact us. There was no contact made. So given that point, as of 6 months ago. If we now have good news for how 18-19 ended, we would like to share that with them. And if they see the excess, as we call it, then that might help us to get the negative removed, no insurance. And that's my job as your advisor, to try and negotiate on your behalf on that. Sometimes, you know, it depends on how that all goes, because they have a job and they have a duty to
Sure.
properly rate the district for potential investors. So, but, you know, that's good news to hear. We would
Well,
wanna share
and
the
that's why I wanted to bring it up, because if that would be included, that could be good news from this,
Right.
you know, what you're talking about as far as the credit rating. And then my other question, and I'm sure I could do the math, when these bonds, so the term is still the same. I think you
Correct.
said it was October of 2026?
2025.
2025. When that drops, when this would drop off, how much does that save us in annual payment? Is that on here, or did I
Yeah,
miss
if you
that?
go to page number 2, go back to the page number 2 with the yellow lines on them. If you were to look on column, I'll go to the top half of that page, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, as the columns 2 and 3 go away in the 25-26 fiscal year, you'll notice if you go to column 6, your 2018 bond, the payments go up.
So the net
So the
is
net
0.
impact is nothing.
Okay.
So what was done back at that time was there was a decision made to use what we call a wraparound structure. So
Right,
defer
wraparound debt, yeah.
So that's what happened there. So I would not expect to see a drop in your annual debt payment.
Okay, just curious.
For quite some
on
time.
How that
But,
was.
yeah, that's how it's all structured.
I do recall that wraparound debt,
Yeah.
so the net, okay.
And that impact is pretty much unshut, as I like to refer to it. Column 8 should show you that as well. And also to be very clear with the board, if we do the refinancing and we structure the savings as I've shown you, they're one-time savings, okay? A little bit this year and a little bit next year's budget, but then it's gonna go back to what it was before. It's not 146 every year. It's 146 one.
Yeah, I saw that.
I just wanna
It's
make
not
sure I
as-
pointed that out.
Yeah, most of the savings are front-loaded.
Right. And we could change that if that's something that we discovered would be a better idea, but that might be able to help some of those capital project list things.
All right, thank you.
I'm curious, based on your experience and expertise, the length of time that interest rates have remained or have come back down after starting to trend back up. What do you think about this? At the bottom here, the timeline you propose. I know that you mentioned there are some things that are completely out of our control, but do you feel like they're likely to stay here throughout this, or do you think that there's a chance that they spike up in this between now and what you outlined here?
We've seen a little bit of rise in rates in the last week or so, largely because, and the main driver is the U.S.-China trade war. As we start hearing things become better, as I like to say it, have the trade war be less tensions, that tends to be bad for interest rates, okay? It's better for stocks usually, but interest rates have come up as we've started hearing more about those tensions getting better. The market expects the Federal Reserve to reduce short-term interest rates 2 more times this year. So the thing that would be bad is, although the market expects it, if they don't do it, that's what's going to happen. What really triggered rates falling as much as anything else was people thought the Fed was going to raise rates 2 or 3 or 4 times during the course of 2019, and they stopped that and, in fact, reversed course, which is why rates have come down. So we actually have to watch, again, about the trade war stuff, the global economy, as you all know. I mean, if you look at a 10-year treasury, if you buy a 10-year U.S. government bond today, it's about 1.6 or 1.7. If you buy a German 10-year bond, there's a negative interest rate associated with it. A French one, negative interest rate. Netherlands, you can go to the Netherlands and get a mortgage and buy a purchase of property and only have to pay principal back over 30 years, no interest. I mean, it's amazing what's going on in the world, and that's really been signaling global recession. So, you know, it's amazing how we're all tied in together. So if the Fed doesn't raise, if there's, the trade tensions start to kind of get a little bit better, if there's a deal, Depends what's tweeted too nowadays, right? It seems like that can move the market on a moment's notice. There's only so you can only move as fast as you can in terms of really the rating agency is really kind of the key here. So even if you wanted to lock the rate tomorrow, we probably couldn't do that. So, that's why we're trying to move as quickly as we can. I know the board, if you authorize us in 2 weeks, we do the parameters in the meeting after that. You've done everything you can to get to the market as fast as you can, and we'll just work with them to get our rating and all that stuff done as fast as we can. The other thing, too, is you can imagine there's a lot of deals in the market right now. I don't want to pick a week where there's 16 Pennsylvania school districts selling bonds in a week. I want to make sure that we hit a market at a time where the eyes and the focus are on Boyertown. I don't want to be competing with a bunch of other issuers. So that, those are all the things that I have to worry about.
I think it's a great thing to do. We were talking, or you mentioned the threshold. Is there given that you're netting the best you can,
Right.
Insurance costs and closing costs and all that, what would prevent you from, why wouldn't you do this? Is there a threshold, below 100,000, you're still looking at 20,000 per year savings? Why wouldn't you do this? Is there anything, any downside that we're not really seeing?
I've had many clients, many board members say, if you can save me $1, I'll take the buck, okay? For my perspective, again, and there's no law or rule or whatever, for a deal of this short, and it's only got 5 or 6 years left on it, there's only so much we're going to be able to squeeze out of it. But I kind of think to myself, boy, I would like to see my client net savings that are at least equal to the cost. Now, these numbers are net, but at the end of the day, if there's 160 grand of savings, I'd like to see you get 80 and everybody else the people that have to do the transaction get 80. That's just my thing personally. So again, that would be 160 and half goes to everybody to close the deal and half would go to the school district. That's just something I throw out there, and I've always been honest with the board. But
Thank you.
can
One
do it for
more,
whatever.
not really a question. The question came up earlier about, the drop off of these bond payments and the increase in some of the other offerings we've made. It's safe to assume that all this is, at least as we know it today, is in the 5-year plan. I just wanted to make that point because I don't want people looking at, that bond's going up, our debt service goes up $2 million in that year. It's all budgeted in right at this point. Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Foose, you had another question?
When talking about net savings, does that include? I know you had said if we were to proceed that Ms. Clauser and Ms. Pitts would get to work on various things. Does that include time, like business office time, in that?
I did not assume a cost for the business office time.
So I guess maybe when it comes to a threshold,
no charge.
when it comes to a threshold of where it might make sense or not,
Right.
that might factor in. So if we're talking a smaller amount of money, then we have to decide on what their time is worth in comparison.
That's a fair comment.
Yeah.
Because they will be taken away from other things to do work on this.
Mrs. Deeroff, just want to check in with you on the phone. Do you have any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
All right. Anyone else? All right, so I'm hearing some positive feedback about this. Is there anyone opposed to putting on the agenda next week? I'm going to the words right here. In 2 weeks, the 24th, I believe. The authorization to proceed. Anyone opposed? All right, we have it. Thank
Sounds
you very
good.
much. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
For your good, clear explanations and teaching us.
Thank you for your time.
The next item on the agenda is a presentation of our fiscal status and sustainability, part 1. That sounds intriguing.
That's a good start.
You didn't put that.
Part 1 is because one of the things you will find that the recommendations when you're trying to address the type of fiscal challenges we're facing, that numbers will, on a cycle, need to be continually updated.
Yep.
So there will be a part 2 and another part after that as we continue to look at it. I think that while they're getting set up, will want to understand tonight is, again, the latest update on how we did this past year, One of the things that I share with the board, that when I came here, I noticed that we were drawing down our fund balance at a clip that I had grave concerns about that would make us run out of money faster. In essence, we've been using our fund balance, which would be a person's savings account, to live off of to meet our expenditures. So in essence, each year roughly, you start the budget cycle off with what we call a structurally deficient budget. You actually have anywhere from $3 to $4 million worth of expenditures more than your revenues. So if in essence, you're like $125 million worth of expenditures, $121 million worth of revenues. So then between a combination of taxes and a combination of what we did this year, changing some of how we do business, a combination of redoing some contracts that save money, you'll see some spending restrictions in place. And then the unfortunate piece that you'll see in our presentation is the amount of turnover and vacancies that we had in the district, which is really not a good thing, because if we have the position, we should believe that we want the staff working. It produced an excess. So the good news is it offsets having to use some of our savings account. The bad news is that had we had all the employees we budget for and need to deliver service, we'd be running by the skin of our teeth. But an excess of about $1 million is really not a lot. That's really 1%. In fact, a good governmental GFOA financial recommendations would be that you should be within 1% to 2%. So anytime you stay within that range, you're actually doing well. Any closer, you risk overspending your budget. So I think she's ready now.
I am
was
ready. You
ad-libbing
practically
by
gave
time.
my presentation, Dr. Benton, so
I was giving the executive summary while you were setting up.
thank you very much. All right. So tonight we will be looking at our fiscal status for the end of the year of 18-19, and also some sustainability things to look at. So we're going to start with where we are currently in 18-19. So a month ago, you had seen preliminary results, and of course at that time we still were saying that we are working until we are ready for our audit, and that continues to be true. So these were the numbers you saw. 117 million in revenues, almost 118 in revenues, almost 117 in expenditures. And at that time, they gave us an excess of $803,000. Yeah, it was a good year. It was a good year. All right, so that's what you saw a month ago. And these are the details of the revenue that you saw at that time. And just point out a few highlights. We were very fortunate in where we ended in earned income tax. We were over budget by, and over budget in revenues is a good thing, $672,000, and also other taxes, real estate and other taxes, we were over $239,000. Now, one thing that was not originally in the budget was a pre-K counts grant, and we received $204 in there that was unplanned for revenue, but you also have to understand that there was also the exact offsetting expenditures in there as well. So one area, and this is not going to be a surprise, I know this has been presented at several public meetings, is that in the turnover during the budgeting process that we did double budget for the PA accountability grant for $928,000. So we're very fortunate. If you look at the very bottom right of this slide, if you can see it, I know it's a little bit difficult. At the end of a month ago, we were still $306,000 overall under budget. And one highlight that I didn't point out was also that we were under budget on the FICA and PSERS reimbursement that we received from the state. But that is directly tied to the expenditures that we have in those areas. And as Dr. Benton mentioned, we were under expenditures in the personnel costs. So these are the expenditures that you saw last month at the Finance Committee meeting. And when you look at that and you see that we were almost $2 million underspent on our expenditures. But if you go down that line, I'm sure that the first item and then down that right column that is going to catch your eye is that $1.3 million that we were underspent on salaries and benefits. And as Dr. Benton said, this is good news and bad news. It's great news that we've had some positive positive financial results. But it is very hard when we have turnover and vacancies. It's hard on our staff. They have to fill in. They don't get the support they need, and it's hard on our students. In response to some of our budgetary challenges, administration did put in spending restrictions in December of 18, and also there's been some deferral of maintenance and repairs. There was a copier lease that was renewed during the year that led to $45,000 in savings. And also there was deferring of purchasing of capital equipment. So this is a little bit more detailed breakout of where things fall salary-wise in that 1.3, salary and benefit-wise in that $1.3 million that we saw on the previous slide. So when you look at administration, and you see $168,000 under budget, that's a pretty big number by itself. And when you compare it as a percent of the amount that was budgeted for administration, you see that that's 4.4%. And again, we had a lot of turnover in administration during 18-19. In teachers, we also see what is a large number. You cannot deny that $180,000 is a large number. However, that is on a much larger budgeted number. So that's a 0.4% underneath what was budgeted originally. So we're a lot closer on that line. The next one that jumps out is our IT technicians and our staff nurses. And I just heard Dr. Kim say about how our rates for our staff nurses do make it difficult to attract nurses. So again, we are staff nurses. So we have a lot of vacancies there. Clerical is in pretty good shape. Facilities and custodial is another area. And when we say custodial maintenance, that's our folks who clean our buildings and then also who fix our systems and plow our snow and take care of our grounds. So a little bit less there when you see 116, but it is on a smaller number, so you're looking at a larger percentage then. And I noticed when I come in, when I drive past support services, that I see a sign out there that says custodians wanted. So we know that these are vacancies that we are having difficulties filling. And then the largest one, the largest underneath budget of all those that you're looking at is instructional aides, and that's $290,000, and that's not on the largest item there. So you're talking about an 8% underneath budget. And those are positions we also know where there's a lot of turnover and it's very difficult to attract people into those positions. And that directly affects our students as well as providing support to our instructional staff. So that's a very difficult area to have vacancies in. Down below, you'll see that, as I had mentioned, that the PSERS and the FICA costs are underneath budget, but those are directly tied to the underages in salaries. So overall, between the two, the salaries and the benefits, we're seeing that it was about a 1.5% underneath the total budget. That's probably, as Dr. Bedden mentioned, it's not too bad. That's a pretty good level between the 1% and 2%. We really don't want to get too close to our budget because it can get a little scary when you're approaching possibility of overspending. So now, one thing I do want to point out when we're talking vacancies and turnovers is we really want our staff to be fully we want our positions to be fully staffed all year long because we do have to provide services to our students and to our other staff members. So these really, we would hope, would be one-time savings. We really do want to eliminate that turnover and those vacant positions. So these are not savings that we can count on from year to year. It was an unusual year with a lot of turnover and vacancies. Okay, so now, where are we today? So we were just talking kind of a review of where we were on the last Finance Committee meeting. So we had started with an excess at that time of $804,000. In the meantime, as I had mentioned, we are preparing for our audit and continuing to do work in the business office that applies to 1819. So one of the things that was done was the final invoice to the Berks County Intermediate Unit for our IDEA grant, and that was $524,000. We also know that we will be doing an access grant final invoice that applies to 1819 for $142,000. We have also, in our last subsidy payment, the last subsidy payment in August, the last week in August, there was $98,000 in charter schools that was deducted from our subsidies. So that needs to be accrued as well. Plus, we have reconciliations from the charter schools that we receive that say, you owe us this much money. We know because Boyertown has decided that we would not write out the checks ourselves, that we will let that money be deducted from the subsidy, that we need to accrue that. So the total between the $98,000 that has already been taken out of our subsidy in August and that the remaining amount that we have reconciliations for that will be coming out in the September and October payments. So the total of those is going to be $210,000 for charter school payments. Now, also since then, we have continued to pay bills in the business office that applied to 1819. We've done some reconciliations. So there's just a net item for a bunch of miscellaneous things for a negative 181. So where that puts us today is slightly over $1 million excess. Now, we are continuing to do work in the business office, getting ready for the audit. We know we have to do some reconciliations on our balance sheet accounts to make sure that everything that may have been accrued last year is out of the accruals, and we do have some work to do on our books. So we know that there will be, most likely, some changes for those reconciliations. And there's also a possibility that an auditor might see something that they want us to change. So this is not the final number, but we're getting close. All right, so this is, you've probably seen this one before, just sort of a reminder of where our budget falls. And I laugh because every time I come up and give the treasurer's report, I always say our largest expenditures, with the exception of last month, which was really odd, is our salaries and our benefits. So when you look at that big red 3/4 circle, that's our salaries, our benefits, and also our CRES employees who were our employees and now have been outsourced. So 3/4 of our budget, 76%, is tied to salaries, benefits, and the professional services for those CRES employees. When you look at the next largest item there, that's our purchase services, 13%. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see what makes that up. Transportation, which we have a negotiated contract. We don't have a lot of control over where we are going to go with that right now. We are going to continue to pay our VOTEC. We have not a lot of control currently over our charter school tuitions, but I know that we're looking at implementing some programs that hopefully can address some of that. And we have other tuitions. Debt service, 5%, and that is something other than a potential refinancing like Brad just told us about, we have limited control over. We are committed to that until the bonds have been paid off. So that is where we stand, kind of in an overall picture of where our budget goes. Okay, so we're going to look at a few, I don't think...
Carol, before
Yep.
you go to that, go back. And I just want to highlight, and for the public and on record, this slide is put there because oftentimes people see that big number of 100-something million and really don't understand in context. There's only so many places you can go to make cuts that won't make a significant change in how you do business. So as you can see there, it's either, people, and then programs. And even when you mess with programs, you oftentimes end up having to change people. So it's not as easy as they think to say, cut this or cut that, and then be upset if you don't have the program that you're offering, that you used to offer, or the way you used to do it.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how some of these things have brought us to where we are today. And I don't think that really any of these slides are new. I think they've been presented in other presentations, but we just kind of want to keep these things in mind as we go forward to address our challenges. One of the things that I found very interesting when this was not a Carol Pitts presentation, we all worked together to put this together. So I am on a learning curve, obviously, but this was very eye-opening for me, is that if we had every year raised our real estate tax rate just to the base Act 1 index, today we would have $9 million more in our bank account. And the really interesting thing is that our millage rate would be lower than it is today. I found that very eye-opening. And also that if we had raised our real estate taxes to the adjusted Act 1 index, we would have $34 million more in our bank accounts. So just, when we throw around words like Act 1 index, well, what are we talking about here? And the Act 1 index is set by the state, but this is the PSEA's definition of what it is, and it is based on wages. So if you read all there, the statewide base index is an average of the percentage of changes in wages statewide. We're talking wages and percentage changes in school employee compensation costs nationwide. So it's tied, when you think about it, it's tied to the wages that our taxpayers are paying as well as the wages that our employees are receiving. This is a challenging one, special education. This is also very eye-opening when you see how our costs have increased over this time period from fiscal year 6-7 until today, or until 18-19, our special ed costs have increased 7.39%, while our base Act 1 index is 2.6%, and our adjusted is 3.1. And when you look at those red portions in the bottom, that's our funding from the state and federal, and it has not changed very much over this period of time while our costs have escalated. And everybody's favorite topic, PSERS. So you can just take a look at the history there of where our rates are and what kind of increases we have had as a result of the PSERS increases. The average increase from fiscal year 11-12 until 18-19 is 28.1%, while our average base Act 1 index has been 2% in that time period, and the adjusted Act 1 index has been 2.5%. So that's another challenge that we face. In addition to those operational costs, we do have some other future needs. Charlie just talked to us about some of our capital projects that he's reviewing. If you take a look at this, is the 5-year plan and the amounts that we have in there. I don't think this is new to any of you. I'm sure you have seen this before. As well as we have some needs for technology equipment on the right side of the slide. And Mary Beth Torcha pointed out to us that this does not even include some of the safety and security needs that we have at this time. So there will be additional amounts that we'll need to consider. Additional staffing need, or additional needs, are our staffing. So some of the things that have been looked at are a way to address the pay disparity in our support staff. And you'll hear me often, you'll have to know that my husband is a facilities person. He's the assistant facilities director at another school district. So custodial staff is near and dear to our hearts, and when we think about support staff, you want to attract the people to fill those vacancies, because you really don't want to spend a week without your trash being taken out. You don't want to have to worry about whether Dr. Bedden, I'm sure, doesn't want to have to worry about whether snow can be cleared on a snow day, or whether he can have a late start, because that pushes then school into later into June. So it's something that we do want to address, and it's identified between a PSBA compensation study that was done and internal estimates to be about $100,000 in costs. There is a goal to get the counselor to student ratio down to a 300 to 350 student per counselor ratio. Our secondaries are pretty much at that ratio, but our elementaries are not. So in order to address that goal, it would require approximately 2 full-time equivalencies, FTEs, and guidance counselors do work 20 extra days, so they do have a little bit higher pay rate, average pay rate, than a regular teacher. So that's about $85,000 per FTE for guidance counselors. Currently, the librarians in the middle schools are also teaching half-time English language arts. So the goal is to get those librarians back to a full-time. Now, those are regular teachers, so we're looking at an average salary about $78,000. And one FTE there should address that challenge. And now you see down below, English Language Arts is to be determined, and that is a little bit dependent on how things go with the librarians, since they would be taken out of that half-time teaching position and also the enrollment. So not quite sure where that goes, but it is something that is at the forefront of thinking. I believe that probably is not a surprise that information technology also has some additional staffing needs. And I've said it, I think, several times during this time about the maintenance and custodial staff. We do have some of our staff who are nearing retirement, and the wages that we currently pay are maybe not competitive enough to attract employees to fill those vacancies. And then one last thing, with our change in our community engagement, I know that one of the things that was said was that we would continue to evaluate how that is working for us, and so the potential of a full-time communications and marketing specialist. And you had a really good point earlier today on that, Dr. Bedden. And
Well, one of the things that came up in the board was a part of the conversation is that we can no longer just wait, and we have a certain part of the district and people that will continue to enroll in our school district, but we've lost about $2.2 million worth of market share, meaning that we're losing $2.2 million to people who are going to charter schools. If you look on around you, they advertise, they recruit. We need to get them back. Even if I get half of that back, that's $1 million. And you can't do that unless you tell your story and why you should choose to be here rather than there. It also is a part of what, as I've been on the phone on a number of days with the company called Niche that does the ratings. And quite honestly, your ratings actually impact where people choose to live based on where schools are, what schools are perceived as being quality or not. We have gone from A to A minus to we're sitting at like a B plus right now in Niche. And part of it is, guess what? Respondents and what they say about your school district also. And then there's some other areas that we have to work on that we've got hit with C ratings as far as the district. Things are changing around us and we have to catch up.
all right, and another thing that we looked at is our staffing ratio for our faculty to students and our administration or our management to students. So this came about because of some statistics that were reported in the PSBA bulletin in March and April. So if you look in that section on the left of the screen, it is looking at the average of those ratios for PA public school districts. And it's divided down the other side by enrollment, aid ratio, and whether you're an urban, suburban, or rural school district. So the PA average is on the left. This was done for 17-18. I like usually to compare apples to apples, so I went into 5-site and got that information for Boyertown Area School District for 17-18. And what I know about what's been going on here, I thought, wow, those ratios for management are pretty high. But I do know that we also had a lot of as many vacancies as we had in 18-19. I think there were more in 17-18. So I thought looking at 18-19 might be a little bit better comparison. And you see that the teacher rate, faculty to student ratio hasn't changed too much, and it looks like we're probably right on target. We want to be there. Some areas a little bit better, and then we probably do want to have a nice ratio for our students to serve them. However, we're better there for the management ratio. We're just not anywhere close to what the statewide average is. And in order to come to meet any of those 3 different ratios that we looked at, we would have to add 8 to 13 management staff. Not that we're necessarily going to, but that's where we would need to be to meet the state average. All right, so we did put together a real quick 6-year projection, and that 6-year includes this year based on our current budget, and then 5 years out. So we have some assumptions, and then the projections based on those assumptions, and then we have an impact on the fund balance. And that's going to be really hard for everybody to see, I know. So I'll just read through some of them. Real estate taxes, what we did was we know what the Act 1 index is for 1920, and the 2021 Act 1 index was released last Saturday, so we do know what that is. There are a very specific formula with information that we do have that will allow us to calculate the 2021 Adjusted Act Index, as well as the Independent Fiscal Office has some projections for Act 1 Index that we can use to make some projections. Now, this is part of the calculation is our market value personal income aid ratio, and we obviously don't know what that is, but we know what today is. So in the assumptions, we assume that it would be the current one to project an adjusted Act 1 index. And we also assumed annual assessment increase of 0.92%. So that's what you'll see when you see the real estate taxes go in the next slide. We assumed a 1.78 annual increase on earned income tax. That's based on trends, and as we've heard, we don't know. We hope that the economy continues to go well, but that can be a big unknown. So what we assumed for salaries is support staff is pretty much laid out that they basically get the base Act 1 index. So we assumed that for all salaries for all employees in the district. And we used that independent, I'm going to say IFO, so that's the Independent Fiscal Office. We used their projections to do that base Act 1 index. For employee benefits for our health care, this year we did budget 4%, but we have been using 8% increase for our remaining years in our projection. Social Security is set by the federal government. The PSERS contribution is a projection by PSERS that was published in November of 2018. You do recall that we have moved some of our employees to purchase professional services. The trend on that particular line item had been 7.2%, but we know that that probably won't be the case for the CRES employees. So what we did was we pulled the CRES employees out and did an increase of 2.4 on their costs, and then the previous trend of 7.2 on the remaining. I'm not going to go through those others in detail, but those other those other increases are based on trends. And we're also looking at our actual debt service schedule. So this is what this 6-year projection looks like with those assumptions I went through. And just remember, this projection is only as good as the assumptions that we made. So one of the things that really caught my eye when I was reviewing this, making sure that we had done things correctly, is the state revenue going down. I thought, how is that possible? But if you remember earlier, I said that we had double budgeted for one particular line item for the Ready to Learn block grant in 1819. So in order to correct that, the budgeted revenue actually went down for the 1920 year. So I'll let you look kind of through where we go. For here, we did just pull out some selected costs so you can kind of see the trends. Where my eye goes is to the bottom. The annual deficit, in the 846 for this year, and then it continues to grow for the remaining years with those assumptions that we build into this projection. 1.8 million, 2.6 million, 3.8 million, 4.6 million, and 5.5 million by the end of this projection. And at the bottom shows the accumulated deficit that we would have if we were to follow, if things were to meet this projection. So the last thing we did was to look at the impact on fund balance under this scenario. So the top of this projection is for our total fund balance. So remember, that includes our committed fund balance and our unassigned fund balance. So you'll see where we stand with that, with those results that we currently know about for 1920. So the $12.3 million, and looking with those deficits that we projected across the bottom. Then we go with a negative ending fund balance by 23-24. The other thing to look at is underneath, we're talking about the unassigned fund balance. That's where we are restricted by the state to have 8% of our expenditures. So if you look on that second to bottom line, you'll see at the end of 1920, we have 6% unassigned, 4%, and then we continue to go down until we're negative. The other thing that we did was we looked at where the ending fund balance is in unassigned fund balances for the number of months available. And I apologize, we had the word expenditure get dropped off in this slide. So it's for how many months of expenditures we would have at the end of a fiscal year. And less than 1 month in 1920. That's our best month. So we're down to a half month by 2021 if this scenario were to be the one that occurred. So that's just kind of a brief overview with a very quick projection that we made. Clearly, as Dr. Bedden said, we have challenges ahead as we work towards serving our students, our community, and our staff. And we want to maintain fiscal responsibility. So that's what I have. Question? Yes, Mr.
Well,
Hughes.
thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks very
Oh,
much.
I'm sorry, I can't do
That's
that. You get to do
okay.
that.
Thanks very much for rounding out our night tonight with yet another very clear presentation. I know I have some clarification questions, but I'll go around with my colleagues first. Mr. Foos?
First thing, whenever I see presentations like this and the projections, it always reminds me that just to do what we're already doing each year costs more. So not changing a thing, and that's where you see these annual deficits continuing to grow. That's not us doing new, better things. That's doing the exact same thing year after year, but the cost of everything goes up. And like you had pointed out, the salaries and benefits in particular, every year those things are going up, and I think that's important. That's an important aspect to take away from these types of presentations. One of the questions I had is around some of the support staff. With the partnership we have with Crest now, is there what our current vacancy rate or rate of turnover? It may be too soon to tell, but how does that compare to other years, and what's the strategy to try and fill those? Does Crest have an articulated strategy to help us with that?
So I'm going to answer, and Dr. Kim can add. Right now, it is early to tell, but as of right now, nothing has. Remember, our rates are still the same. They're still paying our rates, so we didn't change anything with salaries. So that's the first problem. We changed how we recruit and market. So like we're using Indeed, which has increased our response internally. But Dr. Kim says they actually have broadened their umbrella and thrown it out wider than what we've been able to do in the past to try to attract more candidates. But at the end of the day, I'll give you the challenge that we often face in some of the support staff issues. One is you already got the study that showed that we had X number of employees who were actually below the market. And I thought she did a really good job of finding that peer group that we're competing against. But two, one of the conversations we've had just recently is our other issue is how we employ, meaning how many hours. When you piecemeal, and that works for some people, but there are a lot of people who say, I need to work full time. So a lot of the how we're looking at how we package our positions is also, I think, contributing to the problem. Like we just had a position that really was only 2 or 3 hours, I think, and I had to basically authorize it to be 4 hours because we couldn't get anybody. So how we package our hours and that is contributed to whether we get applicants. The other challenge that we continue now, it's leveling off a little bit, but you notice they have yet to say Piecers is going to stop. It's only slowed. But, I remember when I first applied for the job, and part of the scenario y'all gave me was to look at a $2 million shortfall. So I asked Becky to send me a copy of your budget. And she'll tell you, I called her and I said, did y'all make a mistake? Like your benefits were showing like a third. You remember? And she said, no, that's correct. And I was like, that can't be. Now, I had been gone for 10 years, and so I hadn't really paid attention to how it's escalated. So our challenge is every time you try to, for school districts now, raise the salary to be competitive in the market, you just got slapped with a higher percentage also of retirement costs, because once they hit a certain amount of hours and they're full-time, we don't get a choice. We got to pay into that pension plan. So that also adds to the higher cost of employing staff. And that's our challenge. And then you couple the retirement with the benefits, it makes a pretty healthy charge. I mean, you saw the roughly average $78,000 for one teacher. That's actually just the salary. When you add on the PCERS and the healthcare and benefits, we're approaching $100,000 a year just to employ a teacher on average. So those are the challenges that we're facing as a district, and many districts have faced it. The good news is what saved us to a certain extent was you had financial advisors who put money aside for PCERS and other stuff to try to slow that impact, but it would have been devastating. The other part you see that slide is the significance of losing your fund balance. Sometimes people don't realize is what actually impacts our borrowing capability. So you lose your little bit of your bond rating goes down, then your interest rate gets charged higher. So it actually costs you more money. And at the end of the day, we're about 5%, I think, in debt service. Well, think of that as like if you had a mortgage. If you went out and got your credit rating done, they would actually say that's really, really good because your credit rating is your debt to income ratio, and it's usually probably around more like 30% you can go. We're not anywhere close to that, and we're considered one of the lowest debt service percentages districts in the area. So we have borrowing power, we just don't have cash to pay it. I probably gave more than what you asked. Did I answer it now?
Yes.
Yeah, nothing has changed right now. It's early, but also what we see nothing has changed is just the market challenge. Nurses are hard to find. We're competing against private sector now. When the market crashed, not just here, even when I was in Virginia, we got a floodgate of nurses. As soon as the market went back up, guess what happened? They went back to the higher salaries in industry. The same thing with some of the skilled trades. When the market goes back up, when there's direct competition, same thing with bus drivers. They're now going, if you got a CDL, you got choices. And that's where we're, HVAC, electricians, we're competing against private sector. To your point, then cost goes up.
I had one or two other comments, then one other question. I appreciate that it was noted that there's the salaries and benefits, which is obviously the biggest cost driver for the district. But then there are a lot of other items that lack flexibility, including things like transportation, where it's not state mandated, but in a district our size, almost 100 square miles, it pretty much is a mandate. We're not a district that could operate without transportation, so that's essentially a fixed cost.
It is because of, to your point, and you do have a choice, but given it would negatively impact the quality of your district. And I guarantee you would lose some of your market share of people who want to go to school here, because that would create an additional challenge and burden. And I will tell you that if we do get the growth that people talk about, our first line of defense is to transport kids to where the vacant spot is. So that transportation cost could eventually go up because we do have seats that we can move kids into when people talk about anticipated growth before we talk about taking on more debt. The next line of defense would be then to add on versus thinking we're going to build a new school. Because as I've said to the board, we can't afford it. Our defense mechanism is transport children to where the vacancies are. Then next, if that is exceeded and we run out of space to try to add on somewhere, which then that means your debt service and your capability is going to be that much more important for us before we get to the larger issue of how you're going to build a new school. Well, that's way off our radar, is not even a thought at this point because of what we're dealing with.
One of the things I like about the Act 1 index is that it is, it's being adjusted each year based on wages. But one of the issues with that obviously is we're primarily funded through property taxes, which don't always follow with somebody's wage earning. And but in Pennsylvania, we have in the state constitution the uniformity clause where we can't different groups of people can't be taxed at different rates. So it would be great to see a system where you're not only are we adjusting based on the Act 1 index, but then if your wages aren't going up, that tied into your property tax in some way. But unfortunately in Pennsylvania, unless our state legislators want to take that up, that won't be changing anytime soon.
The only good news that, if you remember, we shared with you is because we did look at that issue. Not that we could do anything about it, like you said, but we were trying to be sensitive to, when we developed this budget, what was happening with those who are on a fixed income or retired. But if you actually when we looked at the data, the actual raises given for Social Security benefits and those things actually almost mirrored the exact same thing as our Act 1 index. So we actually have been pretty close to mirroring that increase. So that was at least one piece of good news when we're trying to factor in how bad are we impacting some of the most sensitive people in our community. That at least it was almost identical in the increases.
Yeah. And then I just had one clarification question on the slide where we where the PSERS increase was, I forget which slide that was on. But I think we were showing, it's on slide 13, the PSERS net costs with a 28% increase. Is that, so like Act 1 is for our entire budget?
Correct.
PSERS.
Well, no, Act 1 is what we can raise our real estate taxes.
Right, sorry. So I was just, is the 28% relative to the budget as a whole, or is that 28% specific to?
That's PSERS. So, and
Right.
and it's net. It is net. So we do get 50% reimbursement from the state for PSERS. So,
Okay, so
it
all
is the
that's-
net amount, but it's just that line item.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Elsier.
Yeah, so I just want to compliment the business office for this presentation. I think certainly had a lot of detail, but the thing I want to say, it's one of the few times where it's a holistic view of where we're at, where we're going, not even a 3 or 5 year projection, a 6-year projection. It also included capital project needs in the future, IT needs in the future, which I know Mr. Iannelli has put together a 5-year plan or so for his IT department. So I really want to thank you for that. I think this can help the board keep at maybe closer to 50,000 feet. I think the other thing that I think is really positive about this presentation tonight is one of the things we've talked about as a board for the last couple of years is let's not wait for October, November, whatever, to start doing budgets. So we're already looking at budgets, and it's September for next year and future years. So I really appreciate that. That's something we've been trying to do. I know we got a little curveball in the last year or so with the stadium situation that took up a lot of time in meetings and all. If you could please go back to slide 11, I just want to point out a couple things on some of the slides that were put together. So I certainly, and I think most board members know what the Act 1 index is, but again, this is one of the few times, or maybe the first time, it's really been spelled out by definition as and what it's based on. And I really want to, just call that out. The next slide, 12, when you talk about the structural deficit, special education, and this isn't, from everything I read, this isn't just Boyertown. This is throughout the state of Pennsylvania, probably throughout the whole country, the increase in special education costs. And the next slide, 13, just want to call out, and I know you've gone over this, but I just want to really call it out again. When I look over the last decade or so, this huge, let me say it again, huge increase in PSERS has impacted all the schools in the state of Pennsylvania. And we here at Boyertown have been able to continue our programs in spite of this huge increase. And I think Dr. Bennett just called it out that there was some financial thought put in several years ago to have a dedicated fund for PSERS to help offset this huge increase. And it's still, as he also just said, it's going to continue to go up. But certainly, and we hope, not nearly at the rates that are shown on this slide, at 12, 16, 21, 25, 30, 32. I mean, it's huge, the increases. And again, the future needs on the next slide, just want to call that out. Again, I really appreciate the thought process that was put into this, as well as future needs for staffing. If you could please go to slide 16, and then I'll probably end the calling out the slides. But, sometimes it's very easy for any one of us, any community member, whatever, to take a look and say, well, you got to cut the administration. That's where all the costs are. And yet the beauty of this slide shows that we are tremendously under the average, way below the average of the number of, they call it management, but I assume that's administrating.
That was what they had on their slide, so we use their
Use
definition.
the same definition, yeah. So basically, it's administrators. So we're lean and mean in that category. And quite frankly, I don't know where we could cut if we wanted to cut there. I mean, that's just phenomenal what our administrators are doing as far as, you know, running the buildings and the education of our students. So I just wanted to call those things out, the PSERS, the high-level piece, the future needs. One small points department is in the capital fund balance, and I'm sure everyone's aware of this, the money that was set aside for capital projects has to be used for capital projects. So I'm sure you're well aware of that. I just want to call that out for the public, that we don't have the latitude as a board to change that. That has been based on law, and our solicitors could certainly talk more to it than I can. But those monies, for the most part, they have to be used for capital projects. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Denim.
Yes, thank you for putting this presentation together. I think a lot of the slides, we as a board who kind of live this every week have seen it. So for me personally, it wasn't a lot of new information, but I really appreciate it being put into a manner where the public and people can understand where the district is. And I have to say, it's very sobering, and I just wanted to point out again, and thank you for explaining the Act 1 index, because I think we tend to just talk about these things and it comes off and people just don't understand what we're talking about. So when we go through when you did the assumptions, and again, budgets are you know, these kind of living documents that we try to keep ourselves within. And all the years that I have been on the board, we have, thanks to you and Mr. Sobolewski in the earlier years, we always came within 1%. It seems like. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, I've been gone for a couple of years.
Right,
so,
but we pretty much have done a good job and come in. I don't remember any years that we've really gone egregiously over budget. So the main assumption that I think is worth pointing out again is that your budget analysis of the next 6 years takes into account that this board and any future board would increase revenues, raise taxes to the adjusted Act 1 index, which is right now approximately 2.5%.
Adjusted Act 1 index? No.
The adjusted is 3 point.
The one they just released for 2022, the base is 2.6.
So we're at 3 point.
So that would put us for the adjusted Act index for 2021 at 3.2.
3.2.
Mm-hmm.
So all of your assumptions are at saying that we would be raising those taxes, and with that, we still could be facing deficits. So it's very sobering, and I think as someone who's been on this board for 6 years, it's good to kind of have that self-reflection and say, okay, you know, this is serious now. We tried to compromise, make it work. And I think we're always looking as a board of where we can cut. And there's always that philosophical discussion about, you know, can we do this without raising taxes? Can we do this with finding more cuts? And I think that what I'm hearing from the community and what I hear from the public a lot is that don't raise my taxes, but really don't cut anything. Don't you know, cut art or library or and the numbers. And we're just not talking about programs. I mean, we're talking about things that are totally out of our control. And it used to be school districts would say, well, 75% of our things are out of our control. But really, when you look at this, and if you say transportation is a must, that's another 6% of the budget. So you're up to 88, 89. And then if you look at some other things like the charters that we're having difficulty controlling, you know, you're up to 90, 91% of the budget. So it's really sobering to kind of look at this, and I think it gives us a good perspective to see, you know, what our choices are, and where we kind of have to go from here. And I think it is really, again, I just can't reiterate this enough, that I don't think we put this out enough to show the rest of the community what boards are dealing with. And it's just not our board in Boyertown. It's boards all across the state. And yesterday, Monday, I was in Washington with a bunch of school board members on a federal advocacy day, talking about increasing IDEA money and all that kind of stuff. And although we don't get tons of money from the federal government as a percentage of our budget, every couple of $100,000 makes a difference. And some of this, the federal programs are flat funded, but basically education has been fairly flat funded from the state. There's been increases, but a lot of those increases have gone to things like security and safety. So on top of this, we're looking at state mandates that are going to cost us more money down the road. So to Mr. Foos's point, we're spending money and having increases without even doing anything extra. And we're looking at a chunk of money for technology, for safety and security, that is going to be totally out of our control because those are mandates. I mean, they're talking about having a mandate of having teaching CPR to every student. So that means that we have to add into our budget all the equipment and the time to do CPR. So mandates, I think people don't understand, the community doesn't necessarily understand that it's not that we want all this stuff and we're spending irrationally or not being responsible, but it's forced upon us. So again, you know, thank you for doing this, and it's rather sobering.
So this was a big team effort. So we spent a lot of time all together doing this. And
Yeah, to follow on to Mrs. Denon's comments, there was a really good editorial in our Boyertown Times just a couple weeks ago about the state of public education and things that the state mandates and things that the state could do, because I don't think people recognize how much is in the state's hands versus how much is in each local district's hands. And it did point to, you know, this dire view of us running out of money in just a few years. We are not alone. I had a couple questions. I know we had a slide 12 showed that state funding of special education has stayed rather flat while the cost of it has skyrocketed. I know that the basic education support that we get from the state has also stayed relatively flat. And one thing that I wanted to make really clear for the public is we do get a lot of communication from our legislators. And they often say, the most recent one I got showed how much our state funding has gone up for education over time, year after year after year. And I think one of the things that really makes that happen is they count the PSERS increase in there. So we're charged a certain amount for the PSERS, which we showed in slide 13, how that's going up exorbitantly, right? And then it shows the district share, which is half. The state reimburses us half of what they charge us. So when they reimburse us, they show that as additional funding they gave to us. So it's not really, that's kind of explains a lot of the difference between when we say it's flat and they say it's increasing. That's a big factor there. And I don't know if there's any other factors that you would want to point out, but I think that's the biggie, right?
no, yeah, when you look at what portion the PSERS reimbursement is today versus of our state revenue, what it used to be, it's just unbelievable.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think it may be a future presentation. I think it's really hard for looking at the last slide to it says, it shows us in our funding that we're, getting underwater, whether we're looking at the total fund balance or the unassigned fund balance. Either way we look at it, but I think it would be great to have a little bit of primer on what's committed versus unassigned. I think it's something that's hard for the board to grasp, but certainly hard for the community to grasp. And then I just had one question about the management and the faculty ratios. What does the state consider management? So certainly administration, principals, but what about other roles like counselors? Where do they fall?
No, the counselors were not part of the management. So they were looking at principals, assistant principals, central office staff, business staff, transportation directors, facilities directors.
Okay.
So no, they were not considering those positions.
Okay.
They had and I don't have it with me, but they did have a very clear definition, which was very helpful for me when I pulled up the 5-site information. So I did my best to match what was in their definition.
Yeah, but bottom line, like Mrs. Denon said, or I think a couple of us said it, that last slide shows what happens if we don't add anything.
Oops.
Just kind of stay in status quo, right? And paying the increases and what happens naturally. And so that's without thinking about improving anything. So it's a pretty dire picture. Any other questions? Yes, Mrs. Nyman. Ms. Nyman.
Just a comment. I know I heard Dr. Ben and Mrs. Pitts say about if we would have kept our Act 1 and our
Adjusted Act 1?
Thank you. We would have money in the bank. Well, no, we wouldn't, because it would have been spent. Guaranteed, beyond a doubt, it would have been spent. So we wouldn't have any extra money in. They would have found something.
Thanks for sharing your opinion. Anyone else? Mr. Foose.
I think there are a long list of things that we would like to do as improvements. I think that's kind of the point of where additional revenue may have gone to, some of the things that we're not able to do at this point that maybe we otherwise would have already been able to do. And one of the pitfalls of the Act 1 index and the way that it's applied is basically it's calculating the adjusted rate of inflation for that given year. If you choose to stay below that or be at zero, the following year they don't let you make that up. So you're now behind on any cost increase that we've shown in these projections. To do the exact same thing, it costs more money next year. Well, you haven't kept up with that in a given year, so the following year you've now fallen behind and you're playing catch up. And when you do that a number of times over a couple of years or a decade, it can really. I think that graph really demonstrates the impact it can have over time in your inability to maybe make some of the improvements and invest in some of the other innovative things that you would want your district to invest in.
Any other comments? All right. Well, great. Part 1. We look forward to Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, and so on.
Okay.
All right. So that ends the presentation part of our meeting. Is there any committee comment? Oh, Mr. Foose. I thought we were all commented on.
I apologize. I know it's getting late, so I'll try to make this quick. But before September gets away from us, I wanted to take the opportunity to highlight a couple of things. One being, it was already noted, tomorrow is September 11th, and last year we did pass, the board passed a resolution recognizing September 11th and as a day to honor our first responders and the sense of community. So I hope that people can keep that in mind tomorrow and throughout the week. And then also we had previously passed a resolution recognizing September as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and I know that there was something put out by the district recognizing that. And throughout this month, I'm sure that there will be various activities going on. But since we're already into September, I thought I would mention that here. and also going gold, because we talked about the Optimist thing. I wanted to highlight for anybody who wasn't aware about the gold card. If you just go to our district website, there's a search field, and if you put in gold, the first thing that comes up is the gold card. So if anybody's interested in that, it basically is a way for people at least 62 years of age or older to get free admission to a lot of our district activities, sporting events, and things of that nature. So.
And I'll get right to you. Regarding the resolutions, I know the board can see them on board docs. Are they available to the public? Is that piece available to the public? Those resolutions?
I don't know if you log, only way I can have to go back in and.
All right.
And act like I'm not logged in and I can see if I can see it.
Yeah, it would be great if they are, and I just thought I'd ask. Okay.
I think, but I need to check.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Nyman?
Yeah, with childhood awareness for the cancer for this month, are any of the schools doing anything special that we know of?
I don't know what I'm checking with that.
Would you please check into that? I would like to know that, please. And I'm going to be doing another right to know request since my last one was denied, so I'll hand that to Dr. Kim on my way out.
I want to, just for the record to be clear, the denial was not a denial. It was a right to know request. It can't be a question that we answer. It has to be if you want to document or something we have. So I want to be clear that you understand that it's not a denial. It didn't meet what the right to know request says we're supposed to do. And I hope that she got clarity around that.
Well,
Because
first
I don't
of
want
all,
people to think that we're not giving you something that we're able to give.
First of all, as a school board member, I shouldn't be having to do a right to know request. If I'm asking for something that's pertinent to a decision, which I think is very pertinent to the closing of Pine Forge, I should be getting it. I should not have to do a right to know request. But since I'm not getting the information, I will be continuing until I get the information.
And again, Madam Chair, it is understood that if we're going to take more than an hour to assemble something that was supposed to come to the entire board, so that is what we've acted upon based on what is the governance model that we're doing now. Because if we have 9 different people giving us jobs, we really wouldn't be running a district or serving the district. So again, an individual board member is just a citizen. When you come together as a collective body, then that's the directive of how you function. And so if we get asked to assemble that additional information, we're more than happy to do it. So I just don't want you to think that it has something to do that's personal to you, is why I'm saying that.
I would think every board member sitting here would want that information I'm asking for. Because if we're saying we have enough room to close Pine Forge, I would think everybody would want to see how the classrooms are being utilized so that they can make that decision.
Mrs. Denon?
So just to clarify, I remember the discussion about classroom utilization, and if someone can maybe refresh my memory, there was, in the course of the discussion about Pine Forge, I believe there was a classroom utilization chart that we did receive. So unless, I'm sorry, what was it? At the elementary school level. So I thought we received it. So if it's something other specifically that the board collectively feels administration should take time to do, I don't see that we would deny that we wouldn't ever say we don't want that information. It seems to me that the information that was asked, I had been satisfied that the request was kind of answered. So that's where my confusion comes in with this whole thing, and maybe other board members who remember this situation, because it would be nice to have some closure on it at some point. So I'm just kind of asking other board members who, maybe people who chaired facilities, or if somebody can go back and see the information, but I think at some point there needs to be a board discussion so we can have closure on it. And if it is going to take an absorbent amount of time, which it seems to me like it's going to take more than an hour, and administration is telling us right now they don't have time to do it, then it should kind of be case closed. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think this is something we can certainly look at. It is a big decision. I guess, maybe offline we can have some conversation as far as exactly what is needed. Because yes, there was information to that effect put in the presentation, so I'm not quite sure what is still needed. So we can do that and talk about it as a board. It's the right thing to do, and if the majority of the board wants the information, we can, as a board, collectively give direction to get that additional information. So we can look at that. We have a voting meeting coming up, an action meeting on September 24th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. President. Other comments? Mrs. Deeroff, do you have any comments before we close?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right. All righty. So the next item is upcoming meeting dates, and I think our standard these days is to say that these are on our website, and they're very prominent there, and so I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Mr. Foos, and a second. Oh, Mr. Elsiger, I thought maybe nobody wanted to go home. Okay, thank you, meeting adjourned.